Good. Cuando quieras, Clau, porque ya más o menos la gente está.
Muy bien. Pues entonces ya estamos en hora y vamos a dar comienzo entonces a la tercera sesión de este ciclo que ha resultado verdaderamente exitoso acerca de las emociones en el mundo antiguo, especialmente en el mundo griego. Y en esta ocasión nos acompaña Andreas Serafim, a quien agradecemos su participación, su pronta aceptación para participar de este ciclo. Y los dejo entonces con Emiliano, que va a hacer la presentación oficial de nuestro disertante. Muchas gracias a todos por participar de este nuevo encuentro.
Bueno, muchas gracias, Clau, por las palabras de inauguración. Bueno, para mí es un enorme honor poder presentar a un excelente colega y a un amigo como Andreas Serafim. Andreas Serafim, y voy a hacer una breve presentación, que por supuesto no va a hacer honor a los antecedentes y al currículum de Andreas, pero voy a tratar de resumir sus principales logros académicos. Obtuvo su título de doctor en la University College de Londres y un máster en la Universidad de Texas en Austin, dirigidos respectivamente nada más y nada menos que por Chris Carey en Londres y por Michael Gagarin en Austin. Ha ocupado varios cargos académicos docentes antes de incorporarse en el Centro de Investigaciones sobre Literatura Griega y Latina de la Academia de Atenas, que es donde actualmente se está desempeñando. Fue becario postdoctoral en la Universidad de Aristóteles de Salónica, becario postdoctoral también en la Universidad de Chipre, profesor adjunto en la Universidad de Chipre y en la Universidad Abierta de Chipre. Fue también fellow postdoctoral del gobierno de Irlanda en el Trinity College de Dublín. Fue honorary research fellow y también assistant lecturer en la University College de Londres. Andreas es un especialista básicamente en oratoria y retórica griegas. Fundamentalmente también trabaja el cruce entre derecho y performance con un amplio abanico de intereses de investigación. Y esto incluye aspectos vinculados con la religión griega, con la recepción de la retórica antigua, la lingüística, las teorías de género y de sexualidad, y también otras teorías interdisciplinarias que Andreas, como van a ver, maneja con mucha solvencia, teorías sobre el humor, teorías sobre la persuasión, entre otras. Actualmente tiene un proyecto nuevo, y es este proyecto el que quizás lo vincula de manera más cercana con el mundo de las emociones, un proyecto que se llama Language from the Body, el lenguaje desde el cuerpo, un compendio de los trabajos culturales sobre comunicación no verbal en la literatura grecorromana, y este proyecto lo está desarrollando con otra estimada colega y querida amiga, Sofía Papaioannou, de la Universidad Nacional y Capodristiana de Atenas. Las publicaciones de Andreas son numerosas, numerosísimas diría, y todas ellas han generado nuevas perspectivas para percibir esta relación entre derecho, teatro, performance, retórica. Voy a mencionar solo algunos de sus textos. Como autor individual tiene un volumen publicado en el 2017 sobre oratoria ateniense y performance, que ha, a mi juicio, incluso cambiado algunas de las perspectivas con las cuales leemos la oratoria griega, y más recientemente ha publicado un volumen sobre el discurso religioso en la oratoria ateniense y en la política. Pero además de estos volúmenes individuales, en los cuales también ha comentado distintos discursos y alegatos de la oratoria forense, ha editado muchos libros, algunos de ellos en colaboración con Sofía Papaioannou, a quien mencioné hace un ratito. Uno de los volúmenes quizás que seguramente ustedes conocen, editado por Andreas, es The Theatre of Justice, Aspects of Performance in Greco-Roman Oratory and Rhetoric, que publicó Brill, y tiene una enorme cantidad de volúmenes ya publicados y por publicar, no solo en la editorial Brill, sino también en De Gruyter, ¿no? Libros que abarcan desde temas vinculados con la retórica de la unidad y la división en la literatura antigua, la invectiva cómica, la religión y la retórica, o incluso un homenaje a Chris Carey sobre sexo y la ciudad antigua. Como verán, Andreas, a mi juicio, es uno de los grandes especialistas en estos temas que ha logrado vincular de una manera muy sólida distintas dimensiones de la cultura antigua. Y yo creo que aquí está la gran innovación y los grandes aportes que Andreas ha estado haciendo respecto del conocimiento de la literatura griega en general y de la oratoria ateniense en particular. Así que, bueno, sin más, también me sumo a las palabras de Claudia, agradeciéndole a Andreas su participación. Andreas va a hablar más o menos durante 50 minutos, una hora. Andreas en algún momento, y esto lo ha dicho específicamente, nos ha pedido que respondan, porque va a interactuar en algún sentido con algunas preguntas. Como va a compartir pantalla, es muy posible que no los pueda ver necesariamente, así que, por favor, levanten la mano de modo que los pueda ver, o directamente activen el micrófono y participen de manera abierta. Si alguno no quiere participar en inglés, porque tiene algún tipo de vergüenza pública, hágalo en castellano sin problema, y Claudia, yo o alguno de los chicos del proyecto podremos colaborar ayudando con la traducción. Lo mismo con las preguntas. Recuerden que las preguntas les pedimos que las hagan a través del chat. Andreas no va a ver el chat durante la charla, pero esas preguntas después Claudia y yo las formularemos hacia el final de la charla. Si están en castellano, las traduciremos, y en el caso de que estén en inglés, las leeremos en el orden en el que aparezcan. Bueno, sin más, y espero que se haya entendido un poco la logística, le dejo la palabra a Andreas. Andreas, thank you once again. Evharistopoli, thank you for being here, and the floor is yours and the screen is yours. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Emiliano, for this kind introduction. Now, I suppose you can see the PowerPoint presentation.
We can, yes.
Can you please confirm? Thank you. Thank you very much. So, Emiliano, thank you for the kind invitation you have extended with me. Claudia, thank you as well. It is my great pleasure to be with you, sort of. You know that during this COVID-19 era, we have technology to soothe our pains of social distancing. Hopefully next year I'll be able to be visiting Argentina myself, so I can meet up with you in person. So the topic of my presentation today is nonverbal communication, emotions, and the rhetoric of division in Attic oratory. There are many terms that need clarification and definition. Let me start with the first one, which is the key notion in my presentation, non-verbal communication. As Emiliano has pointed out, I would like this presentation to be as much interactive as possible. So if you have some ideas to share with us, please feel free to get intervened into the lecture and share your views with us. And of course, I would like to ask you at particular points in my presentation to give us your thoughts and ideas about the text, because it is amazing whenever you're trying to read ancient Greek rhetorical texts to behave like a community, right? So let me start with the definition of the notion of non-verbal communication. This is a term that refers to the ways of communicating without the use of language, whether conscious, intentional, involuntary, or otherwise. Allow me to try to move to the second. Here we are. Okay, here we are. And nonverbal communication plays an important role in identifying and interpreting the cognitive, emotional, and ethical codes of the values people had in classical Athens and the modes of communication they used in the legal and political forums of public speaking. Now you see a second term, mute language. This is my term. I like it very much. And mute language, non-verbal communication can tell us as much about ancient societies as language itself. Now, the next slide of my PowerPoint presentation is a bit scaring. Are you ready to take a look at it? I know this is not the most charming person I can show to you. But here we have two images of Donald Trump, the former president of the United States. And I would like to say that nonverbal communication tells us actually a lot about him as a person, a lot about his character, and also a lot about his policies, him as a leader. In the first sort of funny image, and in the second, the very bad image when Donald Trump mocked a journalist with disabilities, we can see two sides of this man who was elected president of the United States for 4 years. And we can learn a lot about him as a person, as a leader, as I said. He was unstable. He was emotionally unstable. He was not fit for the role of the president of the United States. And you can see in two images this sad conclusion the American people drew themselves during last elections. Don't worry, of course, I will not talk about Donald Trump. I'll go back to ancient Athens, because my paper explores examples of nonverbal communication in Attic oratory with the aim of shedding light on how these are used to arouse emotions and generate division, two conditions that have the potential to affect the cognitive and emotional disposition of the audience and subsequently determine the legal or political verdict of its members. It will be argued specifically that the speakers attack opponents through the construction of their image in such a way as to indicate how they defy the values, cultural patterns, and beliefs of the Athenian society. This is what I call the rhetoric of division. These are references to non-verbal communication that generate division or dissociation or prolong hostility, denigrating individuals against the background of cultural, socio-political, moral, and interpersonal preconceptions with the aim of isolating them from the community and persuading the audience by setting up people, matters, or ideas as antithetical to the judges and the onlookers. So in plain terms, I will argue that the speakers use non-verbal communication to create and sustain two groups. In the first group, the speakers put themselves and the audience, both the judges and the onlookers, so the Athenians, and in the second group, they put their enemies. And we have these two groups sharply contrasted, sharply juxtaposed. And from this sharp juxtaposition, persuasion is achieved. You will see when we will examine passages how this pattern works. Examples of non-verbal communication that are under examination in this paper fall within three broad categories. First, references to face and facial organs. Second, references to hands. And third, references to gait, to walking. Let us start now by removing Donald Trump and going to the passage of Demosthenes, of course. That's a big relief for everybody. Let us start with Demosthenes' 2598. This passage indicates the attempt of the speaker to intimidate the law court judges. So we have an element here of emotions, and this is fear. Let us take a look at the passage. You see that I put two sentences into red bold letters. The speaker, Demosthenes, warns the law court judges that their faces and eyes will betray their verdict. Let us take a look at the two sentences. They, meaning the audience, will scan each one as he appears, each one of the judges, and detect by their looks those who have voted for acquittal. And then with a question, with what faces and eyes, with what look will you return their gaze? That the face and the expression of eyes are used to form judgments of people is also mentioned elsewhere in the speeches of Attic oratory. In Isocrates 9:44, for example, Evagorus, the king of Cyprus, is warned to place emphasis on the life actions and principles of individuals, not on the frowning of their faces. References to the physiognomic examination of face indicate that the general tendency in Demosthenes' era was for the people to judge others by facial expressions. Now, Demosthenes tries to sustain the relationship between the audience and the judges in an adversarial way. Talking directly to the judges, who might make their own decision to vote for the speaker's opponent, he warns that the people would understand through facial expressions what their verdict was, and will demand that they look them straight in the eye and apologize for an action that would have violated the laws of the city and harm its people. The reference to face and gaze is manipulated in such a way as to create a you-they pattern. You, the judges, will be inspected by they, the people. So we have two groups again, right? The first group comprises the judges, and the second group is more powerful in this case. It is not in general, but it is more powerful in this case. Why? Because the judges, as you know, were not professionals in ancient Athens. They were plain citizens. After the trial, they will go home, they will become private citizens, they will have political ambitions to fulfill, right? So they will need the people to support them. But if they make their own decision, Demosthenes implies in this passage, the people will remember and will punish you. This is a magnificent rhetorical construction of two groups here. You have the group of the judges, which is presented as being less powerful than the group of people, and the group of people comes on the top. This is how persuasion is working in this passage of Demosthenes. There is dynamic performative communication that aims to instill fear in the audience and press the judges in particular to make their mind in a specific way. The judges receive a clear warning that their fellows who value the laws and the prosperity of the city highly and think that the behavior and the voting of the judges in court have an educational character as a means of teaching the citizens how to avoid legal, cultural, and moral injustices, these fellows, the Athenians in the whole polis, would isolate the judges who do not know how to vote and more generally, how to carry out their duties for the benefit of the civic and moral community. So we can essentially see this image here. Demosthenes wants the judges to feel guilty, like the dog, or to feel terrorized. But how? To appreciate the astute rhetorical character of the reference to the faces and the eyes of the judges as betraying their verdict, we should bear in mind that the ballot in the ancient law court was secret. And in practice, nobody could ever know exactly how each of the judges voted, while at the same time, no one of the judges has to undergo the state process of examination of accounts, the so-called ευθύνη. So the reference to physiognomic inspection by the powerful group of the people and the implied potential of these people to understand the thoughts and emotions of others through their facial expressions aim to offer a subtle surrogate for the audit process. and elicit strong emotional reactions among the judges: anxiety, fear, and apprehension. These reactions have the potential to win over the audience and create a cognitive and mental disposition in the judges that will serve the speaker's purpose, in this case, to condemn his opponent. You know very well that the synergy between emotional arousal and persuasion is well established in ancient sources. Emotions, according to Aristotle, all those affections which cause men to change their opinion in regard to their judgments, affect persuasion. Demosthenes himself notes in his speech 19 in section 228 that judicial decisions are affected by feelings such as pity, envy, and anger. In a similar vein, let us go to the next passage, which comes from Aeschines' speech 2 in section 36. In a similar vein, this passage refers to the emotions of individuals as indicated through their faces. There is something very clever in this passage I would like to know your opinion about. But let me first put the context, describe a little bit the context of the passage. Demosthenes said a lot, Aeschines said a lot about Demosthenes, his opponent. And he says in this passage that our worthy colleague Demosthenes, of course, Demosthenes is not a worthy colleague, according to Aeschines. This is a biting irony. Our worthy colleague Demosthenes put on an exceedingly sour face, and then you have this participle, skouthropasas. Aeschines tries to reveal the character of Demosthenes through the lively description of his face as being extremely sullen when he accuses Aeschines of the destruction of the city. An angry face points to the crude and untrustworthy character of an individual who loses control over his emotions and is carried by them so as to attack people around him either physically or verbally when trotting out unfair accusations without accepting any blame for himself, as Demosthenes is presented here as having done. An angry face is presented as an indication of an individual who violently threatens and terrorizes other people. I would like you now to take a close look at this passage and answer the following question I was thinking myself when I was preparing my notes for this presentation. Aeschines doesn't say a bad thing about Demosthenes in this passage. I mean, we can read the passage. There is nothing bad, there is nothing negative about Demosthenes. Yes, there is a biting irony when Aeschines says that Demosthenes is our worthy colleague. Okay, there is sarcasm here, but there is nothing inherently bad or negative about Demosthenes. The only information Aeschines gives us about Demosthenes is that he was extremely sullen in face, skouthropasas. Wasn't it enough for Aeschines just to describe the behavior and the actions of Demosthenes in plain terms? Why did he refer to, why does he refer to his quality of having a sullen face? Can you think why? I would like to listen to what do you think about this passage, because I think it is really astute in its rhetorical composition. There should be a reason why Aeschines doesn't say any bad thing about Demosthenes in this very section 36. Of course, he says a lot in the speech, but this is a different story. He doesn't say any negative things about his opponent in this very section. He just gives us a description of Demosthenes' face. Why? Wasn't it enough for him to tell us that Demosthenes was angry? Can you think about it? Any ideas? I would like to listen to the students, by the way, and to the colleagues as well, but the students have priority. whenever we're talking about rhetoric. Anyone? Emiliano, do let me know if there are any reactions, any comments in the chat. Thank you. Come on, think about it. This is a participle. And he says, Ischines says, sfodra skouthropasas, put on an exceedingly sour face. Why? And I will let you what I think about this passage, and you will tell me if you agree with me or not. Any reactions? Come on, guys. Wasn't it enough for Ischines just to say that Demosthenes was angry? Why was it so important for him to give us this clue about non-verbal behavior here? Emiliano?
I think I saw a hand, maybe Katia?
No, pensaba algo, justamente el profesor Serafim menciona como bibliografía de punto de partida a Latenier, este especialista que trabaja en la repugnancia, disgust, es su libro.
Mm-hmm.
Y lo que observaba ahí es que algo que menciona él en su introducción, creo que es muy habitual en la oratoria, que la repugnancia sea atribuida al oponente, ¿no? Entonces estaba pensando un poco que por ahí esta asignación de esa cualidad a la cara de Demóstenes quizá va por ahí, ¿no? Como asignarle estas cualidades negativas a los oponentes. Eso básicamente.
Bien. Andreas, Katia was mentioning that since you quoted the reference to Lateiner in the first place, and he works a lot on disgust, that since disgust is something that in general you consider and you attribute to your opponent, that maybe showing his face is a way of showing the gesture of disgust as an emotion.
That's a very clever idea. Excellent. So we have anger, we have disgust, right? But was it necessary for Ischines to give us this clue to non-verbal behavior instead of saying that Demosthenes had a face which betrays his disgust or his anger? Why does Ischines give us the information about non-verbal communication here? The point about disgust of Katia is excellent indeed, but why does Ischines give us this information instead of saying in plain terms that Demosthenes behaved this or that way?
Mariana?
Maybe it's related to that he doesn't control his face, so he doesn't control himself, not his face, but he cannot control himself in her whole body. Maybe because that, I don't know.
Yeah, that's the point. That's the clue. Bravo, Mariana. Excellent, excellent. So very good indeed. Think of this reference in this way. If Ischines says that Demosthenes expressed his disgust or his anger or whatever, his snobbery at the Athenians, one may say in the audience, among the judges, may say, look, this is your interpretation of the thing, Ischines. But when the Ischines gives us the very information about Demosthenes' face, probably in a situation which Demosthenes cannot control, as Mariana rightly said, Ischines allows the judges themselves to draw the conclusion about the character of Demosthenes. He doesn't want to say that Demosthenes was angry. He allows the judges to draw that conclusion by giving the very information about his face being skouthropasas. He allows the judges to draw objective conclusions about the behavior and the character of his opponent. Because as Mariana said, Demosthenes has not full control over his face, and some of his expressions are reflexive. So indicating his real character. I'm preparing a paper now in the volume on sex in antiquity, in which I argue that sneezing indicates homosexuality. And that was a reflexive reaction of the human body, a reaction that man has no control over. And according to ancient passages, both Aristotle and some late ancient passages, sneezing can indeed indicate your sexuality and homosexuality in that particular case. So yes, the point Mariana made is a really good one. And I think that if we take that point seriously into consideration, we can find a key about reading and interpreting this passage. Aeschines gives the information about nonverbal communication and nonverbal behavior of Demosthenes in order to allow the judges themselves to draw conclusions, objective conclusions about the behavior of Demosthenes. Excellent. Let us take a look at another passage now, which has a reference to the speaker's opponent. This comes from Demosthenes 19 on the false embassy in section 314. Here we have two references to nonverbal communication. Tas ophrous anespagen, he has raised the eyebrows, and tas gnathous phuson, he has his cheeks puffed out. What is this passage about? Demosthenes describes the behavior of Aeschines when he was in the same place with the ambassadors of King Philip of Macedon and with the other Athenians. And according to Demosthenes, Aeschines showed his snobbery at the Athenians, fawning upon the ambassadors of Philip. The description of a facial expression is indelibly negative in this context, where Demosthenes accuses his opponent of being socially inferior to the other members of the city through the reference to the clerk at the beginning of the passage, and fawning upon Philip, this accusation that Aeschines or the speaker's opponent in general fawns upon Philip and his ambassadors can be found elsewhere in Attic oratory. For example, in Demosthenes' speech 19, section 113, or in Aeschines' speech 3, section 76. The presentation of Aeschines' facial appearance indicates his arrogance and snobbery in the direction of his fellow Athenians, corroborating his presentation as a kolax, a flatterer and double-faced citizen who pretends to be a patriot but who fawns upon the city's enemies. Demosthenes, by presenting Aeschines as a flatterer, tries to exploit the resentment and anxiety of the Athenians against flatterers. Flatterers embodied real anxieties about social mobility. Now, Emiliano is one of the leading authorities in the research of comedy, and he may confirm that the evidence from old comedy points to a widespread anxiety in 5th century Athens that some aspiring politicians were using flattery as a means of upward social mobility and political achievement. The presentation of Aeschines raising his eyebrows may also indicate that he was angry at the Athenians, and we can find information about this very act of raising eyebrows in Aristotle's Physiognomics. This is a treatise that is attributed to Aristotle. This physical description of Aeschines and his presentation as a flatterer of Philip and the Macedonians and as being angry at the Athenians aim to reconstruct the memory of the law court judges in such a way as to sustain a you-he adversarial pattern. So the Athenians, were snubbed by someone called Aeschines. And this adversarial pattern enables the speaker to invite the audience to express contempt for the alleged wrongdoer by voting against him. This is a prime example of how the past comes to the present to shape the future. Okay, let us take a look at another passage to see something interesting. Oratorical passages also indicate the use of facial organs for carrying out non-verbal actions that denigrate and ridicule the opponents of the speakers. Spitting is one of these actions. In his speech on the crown, Demosthenes frequently refers to his opponents as being literally spittable, people worth being spat at. And he uses the term kataptustoi. Let us take a look at two juicy and fleshy passages from sections 33 and 200. In the first passage, you can see that Demosthenes says, ton kataptuston tutoni, this spittable creature here. What is interesting about this passage is the very use of the dictic pronoun tutoni, which is the dictic pronoun strengthened by the use of the dictic iota at the end, right? Tuton plus the dictic iota at the very end. We can imagine Demosthenes raising his hand to point to his opponent who was present in the law court, right? This is performance, absolutely magnificent. And then you have the very term kataptuston, this spittable. And we can imagine that Demosthenes raises the tone and the volume of his voice to express some of his pathos, some of his hostility, his contempt, his disgust about his opponent. That's indeed really performative, magnificent performance we have here. And let us take a look at the other passage from section 200. You can see that we have the term, the verb specifically, kateptuse, tis uki kateptusen ansu. Is there any man who will not have spat in your face? Everybody wants to spit at your face. And then he says, in your face, Ischines, not at Athens, not at me. Can you see something interesting? Apart from the very performative use of the term kateptusen, we can imagine again that Demosthenes raises the tone and the volume of his voice and uses his hands or his head to point his opponent, and you have the performance, the magnificent performance, when the speaker puts some pathos on his voice to communicate that he feels strongly against his opponent. There is something interesting in this passage. Can you find it? Apart from performance, there is something very, very clever. If I were a speechwriter, given the assignment to prepare a speech, I will never have thought of this detail. Can you find the detail? That's why Demosthenes was indeed magnificent in both composing and delivering speeches. Can you find the detail?
About the sound of the verb.
Sorry?
About the sound of the verb. I mean, like, it is as you are spitting when you pronounce the word, you are spitting to your adversary or just to.
Yeah, this is the speech act theory. When you say something, you do something, the speech act theory. That's true, but there is another minor detail in this passage which makes the difference. Can you find it? There's something very, very interesting. As I said, I will never have thought of this detail myself if I were about to write a speech. But Demosthenes did. That's why we say that he was a great, great orator, a great speaker. Can you find the detail? Take a look at the passage, at the words. There is a minor word here, which makes the big difference. Let me see who is a good classicist now, or who is a good researcher of Attic oratory, or who is a good lawyer. Because we are all using our eyes and our mind, by the way, both classicists and lawyers. So there is a minor word here which makes the difference, a lot difference in this case. Can you find it? Come on. Colleagues and students, students and colleagues all together, let us give it a try.
I read you a lot, Andreas, so this is not what you're thinking, but when I'm reading the passage, I see is that according to your rhetoric of division, you can see that there's an opposition between the su, which is the genitive because of the verb, and then on the other side, you have the polis and the I. So that emu is not only at the same level as polios, but it's also his city. So you oppose on the one side the speaker and the polis, and on the other side you just rely.
Exactly, that's the point. You see, Emiliano is a very good speaker himself, a very brilliant orator himself. So he found the point. Why does Demosthenes not say people are not speeding in me or are not speeding in the face of the Athenians? Why does he say about polis, about the city? Does the polis have flesh? Does the polis have face? No. What is the term in ancient rhetorical theory? There is a term about this rhetorical strategy. Do you know it? Prosopopoia. When you put flesh and give face to abstract ideas. Can you think why Demosthenes refers to the city and not to the Athenians? Why does he refer to Athens and not to the Athenians? It will be much more believable to refer to the Athenians because they are people. You can spit at them, you cannot speak at them if you like. Why does he refer to Athens, to the polis? Because that's the point, that's the minor word I was referring to. Because polis refers to all the things that Aeschines was allegedly against. History, morality, religion, values, the ethical codes of everyday life. Everything is different from those values that Aeschines espouses. So you have polis, Athens, in the same group as the speaker, and you have a different group in which Aeschines is put. And you have two groups being juxtaposed. But in the first group, you have Athens. So not only the Athenians, not only the judges and the onlookers in the law court, but everything that Athens is about, everything. So Aeschines is like saying Demosthenes has absolutely no affinity, absolutely no connection with Athens. He's a foreigner. He's an enemy. And he says so by giving this small word in a passage. This is really amazing. An amazing rhetorical construction indeed. Whenever I read this passage, I get very, very excited, as you can see. Now, the adjective kataptuston, which in both passages appears, the adjective kataptuston in the first and the verb kateptusen in the second, indicates that both passages make sense without it. If we remove these two words, kataptuston and kateptuse, both passages make sense. But the very use of these two terms indicates Demosthenes is condemned, disgust, and hostility against Aeschines. References to the mouth are here situated in passages where the emotional tenor is emphasized by the use of strong language of criticism and abuse. Kataptuston is a strong swear term. Modern psychological studies have shown that the use of language of abuse is an effective way of conveying that one feels very strongly about an individual or a situation. It is also treated as a means of evoking negative feelings in someone else. This is what I told you about when I discussed the performative elements of this passage. Epithets are offensive, emotional outbursts of single words or phrases used to express the speaker's frustration, anger, or surprise. Emotionally laden language aims to create a community by binding the speaker to the audience, while at the same time estranging his opponent from the group. So far, so good, and very exciting stuff we have just examined. Thank you very much indeed for all the ideas and statements you shared with us. Let us now go to hands. That hands are perhaps the most evident and forceful source of information about an individual's intentions, emotions, and character is widely accepted in interdisciplinary scholarship. Hand gestures enable whomever used them to present themselves to others. They are important in denoting the cognitive and emotional attitudes of users and their perception, inner thoughts, and expressions of feelings in well-designated contexts of cultural, interpersonal, and communicative processes. This view is corroborated by ancient oratorical sources, with Antiphon mentioning in 434 that our hands carry out the intentions of each of us, as you can see in the first bullet in this slide of my PowerPoint presentation. A wide range of non-rhetorical sources also support the view that hands are associated with the soul of individuals and their state of cognition and emotions. Now, you can also take a look at the next slide of my PowerPoint presentation to see some gestures that are described in the Instituti Oratoria of Quindilian. I know I come here to examine ancient rhetorical passages, but I thought that this will be very interesting to all of you. Quindilian, in his work Instituti Oratoria, describes the gestures that the speakers use to express their emotions. You can see, for example, here on your left hand, some instructions about using this scheme of hand gestures to denote amazement and wonder. It is really amazing how you can change your gestures, hand gestures, to denote your emotions and your thoughts. Now, yeah, someone is talking, no? Hand gestures are particularly handshaking and hand touching are also recognized as universal symbols and signs of friendly greetings, solidarity, alliance, and solidification of a bond of friendship. You can take a look at this slide of my PowerPoint presentation. Handshaking was also part of marital rituals in both Greek and Roman antiquity. Marriages were agreed between males, the groom and the guardian of the bride, usually her father or any other male member of the extended family. Here we are. Their betrothal agreement was sealed by handshaking in the so-called engue. This is the first image on this slide of my PowerPoint presentation. Engue was a ritualized process that literally means to give a pledge into one's hand. Scholars talking about handshaking in ancient Greek literature are, of course, right to underline the semiotic dualism of hand. Handshaking can be used as an indication of both friendship and friendliness. Joanna Sonin was right to argue that the right hand carries the sword, which is used for aggressive or defensive purposes. The right hand is understood to represent the vehicle which holds the sword or any other weapon, the hand which is behind the acts of brutality and heroism that a sword-yielding man might perpetrate. And you can take a look at this wonderful image. Who is the man? He's an actor, by the way. Can you remember him?
Kevin Sorbo.
Yes, Kevin Sorbo, indeed. Thank you, Mariana. This is Kevin Sorbo, who was starring the role of Hercules in TV series a couple of years ago, a couple of decades ago. I was very, very young then. And Hercules is one figure which is dual, if you think about it. Hercules uses his hands to kill monsters, but he also uses his hands to kill his family. So there is this semiotic dualism in hand, and the particular hand that Hercules uses in mythology. Now, in oratory, dualism is evident in the ways hand gestures are used to denote real or fake reconciliation, reciprocity, and friendliness after a fight, or a misdeed an individual has committed against another. The second, a misdeed, is the case with Timarchus, who in Aeschines' speech 1 against Timarchus in sections 60 to 61 is presented as undertaking the ritual of supplication, which included hand touching of a chin as a means of reconciling with his former lover Pitalagos. In the previous two sections, Aeschines gives a lively and vivid description of the aggressive, excruciating, and genuinely sadistic behavior of Timarchus and Hygisandros, his lover at the time, against Pitalagos. Aeschines says that they got into the house of Pitalagos secretly in the night. They start breaking his plates, killing his chicken, and they also whipped poor Pitalagos. The next day, Timarchus and his lover, fearing that humiliated Pitalagos will cause them troubles, letting the other Athenians know how violently he was beaten, are both presented as fawning upon him by means of the gestures of supplication, hypogeniazon ton anthropon, touching the fellow's chin. The act of touching Pitalagos on his chin by hand points to the ritual of supplication, hygesia. Some scholars take this to be the hand gesture that denotes courtship and friendship or affection. This is the seeming purpose of Timarchus and his partner in the specific context of this speech, to show that they care for and have friendly thoughts and emotions about Pitalagos. The truth is, however, that the actions of reconciliation and friendship as denoted by touching in this very passage are not sincere. They aim for deception. Another question then. Why are Timarchus and his lover presented as using hand gestures of supplication to indicate fake friendliness? Why are they not presented as expressing verbally their seeming regrets for what happened and trying to cajole Pitalagos by means of beguiling words? The description has a clear rhetorical agenda in my view, and I would like to know your opinion on this issue. It aims to undermine the personal character and public authority of Timarchus through the use of religion. Touching an individual when in the act of supplication is more than an act of social nicety or courtship, reciprocity or friendliness. It is a ritual, a contract you sign both with the gods and the other members of the civic community to which you belong. Violation of that contract is not simply considered unacceptable and dishonorable in abstract theological terms. It is specifically thought to be an act of impiety, a severe offense that led to punishment not only by divine punishing agents, but also by the legal institutions of the polis. Those convicted for religious offenses regularly receive death penalty in Athens, as we know from several speeches, and they see their right of entering the temples of the gods being repealed. So Aeschines, by presenting Timarchus and Hygisandros carrying out the ritual of supplication in a fake, in a dishonest and seeming way, indicates how God-hated they are and how people-hated they should also become. Piety indicated through any actions of faithfully carrying out sacred rituals and respectfully complying with the religious norms and practices is valued high in a society that is marked by the association of its institutions with religion, as in the theory of polis religion. By doing the opposite, you become God-hated and you should also become people-hated. Another way of undermining the opponent's position in the community is by referring to his hands as being polluted. There are many passages in oratory that exploit this imagery. I choose to refer to Aeschylus's 3:114, wash your hands. That's a message of today's era. I chose to refer to this very passage of Aeschylus because of an interesting medical term that is used, aniatois symporais. Whomever he touches, private citizen or ruler or democratic state, he brings incurable disasters in every single case. Let us take a look at this very term, which is interesting. In its original sense, the adjective aniatos is used to describe diseases that cannot be cured by drugs, surgery, or cautery. Aeschylus implicitly identifies his adversary with the disease and pollution carrier and spreader, warning the Athenians in the court that the city is imperiled. Now, whenever we read this passage a couple of years ago, we may have thought that the Athenians were stupid, right? How can you be persuaded or intimidated actually by this very image? But now, in COVID-19 era, we know that people who have the stigma of COVID carrier and spreader are isolated from the society. So we can effectively see this very, very strong image. Someone who is a COVID-19 carrier and spreader, potential spreader, has the stigma and he is isolated, or she is isolated from the community. And this is exactly what Aeschylus is trying to do here. He wants to say that his opponent is a pollution and disease spreader, and he should be isolated by the Athenian community. Not simply the judges, but also the citizens, the people in the polis. The idea that an individual may bring disaster on his city through pollution is firmly based on Greek popular perceptions and real anxieties, and is used elsewhere in oratory as a means of disposing the audience to take an inimical stance against one's adversary. For example, in his speech 582 Antiphon points out that men with unclean hands or some other form of defilement have embarked on sheep with good people and led them to their own destruction. This is the second passage. You can take a look at this slide of my PowerPoint presentation. It is notable that both Aeschylus and Antiphon place emphasis on the hands of defiled men as spreading the pollution to everything they touch, and on the fact that these polluted or cursed men led the whole community to destruction. That's why I said that the message is that we need to wash our hands. Pollution was similar to a contagious disease, like a typhoid germ, like COVID-19, which was spread mainly by close contact with the affected persons and called for ritual purification, the so-called catharsis. The purpose of these references is evident: to instill fear in the audience against the speaker's opponent. The judges and onlookers are invited to think that they are in personal danger if they are caught and touched by people whose hands were polluted. Fear is a painful and troubled feeling caused by the impression of an imminent evil that causes destruction or pain. Men do not fear all evils, Aristotle says. For instance, becoming unjust or slow-witted, but only such as involve great pain or destruction, and only if they appear to be not far off, but near at hand and threatening. Men do not fear things that are very remote. This is from Aristotle's Rhetoric. Increased fear can be associated with decisive actions designed to remedy the fear-inducing threat. In Aeschylus' 3:1-4, 3114, and in antiphons is 582, the speakers have the similar purpose. By stirring up fear, they aim to manipulate the decisions of the civic audience, the Athenians, and induce both the judges and the onlookers, the Athenian citizens, to think that they should punish those men with the polluted hands as heavily as those convicted for impiety and any other type of religiously laden crimes. Allow me now to go to gait, walking. Fast gait, and you can see a lovely image here. Demosthenes refers to fast walk and a loud voice as discrediting the bearers. This is from speech 37, and as causing annoyance to others. This is from speech 45. You can see full references here. It is not clear from the Demosthenic passages themselves why quick walking is considered to be a mark of disgrace. Here, what I think about these indications in Demosthenes' speeches, and I would like to know if you agree with me or not. I hope you will agree with me, of course. I will argue that the reason may be hinted behind the well-established idea of balance, that balance is virtue. Plato, for example, attributes to Socrates the following words in Philippus: "Then if we cannot catch the good with the aid of one idea, let us turn it down with three: beauty, proportion, and truth." The key notion here is that of proportion. It was believed that the proper blending of the body's humors and the balance between them allows humans to enjoy health. Disease, on the other hand, is caused by lack of balance between the humors of the body, which is caused by excess, and when one humor becomes detached or separated from the others. Seen from this angle, an excessive physical act, as fast walking is considered an act that does not conform to the ideals of the community of high-souled men, and is mentioned in the speeches to deconstruct the cultural, moral, and personal authority of the opponents. Another interesting passage, this is the last one, don't worry, I'm coming to the end of my speech. Denigrating references to gait, to fast walking, can also be found elsewhere in Attic oratory. In Demosthenes' speech 45, in section 63, for example, Stephanus is presented as changing his pace to follow and fawn upon Aristolohus, who was a banker. You can see the passage I have highlighted in red letters here. Fawning stigmatizes an individual who is presented as having no scruples about undertaking any action from which he stands to benefit in any way. Whomever fawns upon the most powerful creates for himself the image of someone who is unstable in morality, who has dubious values, and these were the qualities of the Colax, the flatterer, which terrorized the Athenians, as mentioned earlier in this paper. The purpose of Demosthenes' reference to the adaptation of Stephanus' pace when walking next to a financially powerful man is clear: to cast doubt on his behavior and morality, and invite the audience to turn against the man who had no hesitation to change his manner in order to benefit himself. Finally, some conclusions. This paper is part of the ongoing new research project running at the Academy of Athens in collaboration with the University of Athens, which is acronymized as LAMBO, which means in modern Greek, I'm shining, language from the body. The purpose of this project is to offer an updated, multi-thematic and interdisciplinary compendium and discussion of 5 categories of features of non-verbal communication, which can be found in performative genres, so specifically in epic and dramatic poetry and oratory in both Greek and Roman literature. We are examining particularly face, including facial organs such as mouth and nose, hands, posture and gait, including the use of supporting means such as canes, physical stature, and semi-voluntary or reflexive bodily actions, including sneezing, spitting, hiccoughing, and burping. In the course of preparing the theoretical framework of this project, I realized how important mute language is for a deeper and better understanding of ancient literature. Through a study of nonverbal communication, we learn about what people in different places and systems of values believed about the physiognomic, moral, behavioral, and emotional virtues of the ideal citizens, their sexuality, and obligations towards the community. This also becomes evident from the discussion of nonverbal communication in Attic oratory that this paper offers. Through the examination of specific aspects of nonverbal communication, a wide range of cultural, social, and interpersonal aspects of life in classical Athens is presented, enabling us to better understand the rhetorics of audience manipulation, disunity, and persuasion, mostly achieved through the patterns of stirring up emotions. I think that every paper that focuses on these matters is a useful step forward. Now you can clap. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Andreas, not only for the content of your presentation, which is brilliant as usual, but also for the way of presenting, which is also part of your nonverbal gesture. So thanks for combining your body and your speech in your beautiful intervention. So tenemos 20 minutos para preguntas, comentarios, así que no sé si por el chat, Clau, si estuviste viendo algo.
Sí, no, en el chat todavía no hay ninguna pregunta, así que invitamos a escribirla, o si alguno quiere, tenemos la posibilidad de verlos. Quizás haya que dejar de compartir la pantalla para poder vernos más o menos todos. Creo que entramos en una pantalla.
Andreas, if you could maybe close your screen and stop sharing.
Yeah, let me
So we can
see.
Yeah. Quizás podamos transmitirle a Andreas aquí las palabras de Alicia, ¿no? Que dice excelente,
thank you very
performance
much.
For the.
I think you can read that Spanish, Andreas. Alicia's.
Yeah, it's easy.
I can read and understand.
Yeah.
You were a wonderful audience indeed. Thank you very much indeed for that. I learned a lot from you, especially I like the comment about disgust. It was very, very good. And the comment about the non-reflexive way of dealing with, of using face and facial expressions. That was also a very clever idea. And I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Yeah, we have a commentary of Fernando Falcón. Perhaps you can read it. Can you see the chat, Andreas?
Yes, I do.
Okay, because it is in English. Just a quick commentary. Have you found it?
Yeah. Your observations on posture are also reflected in Quintilian 8:3 when he comments on the Verens passage, in which Verres is described as learning on one of the women who accompanied him. Yes, well, I was actually thinking of Instituto Oratoria Book 11, because this is where Quintilian makes a lot of comments on the body and the use of hand gestures. But thank you very much, Fernando, for mentioning Quintilian's 8:3 as well.
Mm-hmm. We are waiting for other questions. In the meantime, if I may, si puedo, Clau, I have Something concerning what's interesting about your references to the hands. Yeah, I was working on some aspects of Roman law, and in Roman law you have the difference, very clear difference between the notion of manus and the notion of dextera, which is kind of different. Yeah, manus in fact implies authority and power, whereas when in general you find dextera, like in dextrarum iunctio, you have an agreement. So it's the hand that allows for a balance to be established instead of a difference of power. Every time you find manus, it's because someone has the power over someone else. So it's the unbalance. Whereas the dextera in general has to do with what you were talking about, like putting in contact two citizens, for instance, or one citizen and an ally.
I think, yeah, well, Emiliano, this is the very well-established antithesis between left and right hand in ancient literature, which I am discussing in a paper about handshaking that will be published soon by De Gruyter. Yes, these ideas start from ancient Greek stuff, ancient Greek literature. We have the very distinction between left and right hand, denoting the meanings that you mentioned, and also other meanings that are connected with religion, for example, and the power status of people. It is also very interesting that I was preparing a passage, an article about euchomai prayers in Attic oratory, and I found out that whenever the Athenians wanted to pray to the gods, the Olympian gods, they used the right hand, and whenever they wanted to pray to the Chthonian gods, the gods of the land, they used the left hand, which is interesting. Why this is why there is a distinction between the two hands in this case? Probably because the Olympian gods are up and the Chthonian gods are down, but why there is a distinction between the left and the right hand is still puzzling. I see a very common here by Mariana. A very interesting question. Have you ever considered the relationship between yelling and the uses of clothes with the arousal of passions and a specific decorum, cosmos? And you have in mind a passage from Plutarch's Nicias. Well, yes, there are many interesting studies about shouting in the law court. I cannot see the very connection between shouting, you said yelling, and clothes, Mariana, if you would like to elaborate on. But I can tell you that I was examining clothes in relation to sexuality, which is very interesting again, and in the ways in which non-verbal references to clothes are used in order for the speakers to draw conclusions about the character of their opponents. I remember the very famous passage in Aeschines' speech 1 against Timachus. I think it is in section 131. So 131 is the speech against Timachus of Aeschines. And he says that the clothes of Demosthenes cannot be discerned from the clothes of a woman. And this says a lot about the status of Demosthenes, not simply in terms of sexuality, but also in terms of political and military status. So yes, clothes can tell us a lot about the arousal of emotions in the audience, especially in the law court audience. And we have this very, very interesting passage from Aeschines' speech 1 to corroborate the view. Yelling is also under constant examination because we know many stories. For example, in Demosthenes' speech 18, this is on the crown in section 52, or perhaps in 152, I don't remember. Emiliano may remember the passage where Demosthenes says that my opponent is a hireling or a friend of Alexander, Mistotos or Xenos, and we have the Scholia saying that Demosthenes mispronounced one of the two terms in order for the audience to reply the right term, misthetos or xenos, hireling or a friend of Alexander. I think it is in passage 52. And this is the audience's reaction, which is very interesting, because we have also the scholia say that the comic poet Menander intervened into the law court process by saying, Demosthenes Ischines is a hireling of Alexander. And Demosthenes created the impression that the whole audience reacts in a specific way. So yes, I agree that these are two interesting ways, Mariana, of arousing passions and emotions in the audience and manipulating, controlling the audience very cleverly. So you're absolutely right. There is another question here. Could you briefly comment on the relevance of dixis, if any, for the understanding of gestures in this text? Well, wow, that's a very interesting and appealing question, because when I was in the process of writing my book, I have it here, by the way. Let me show it to you. You may have a personal copy, Emiliano, this one. The green one, Attic Oratory and Performance. When I was in the process of writing this book, I had many scholars coming to me and saying, what you say about dixis is mere speculation. Can you elaborate on that? Well, dixis is important in understanding some passages, because in cases you have a dictic pronoun like touton, right? Let me write it in Greek terms, touton in Greek letters, and you have this dictic pronoun strengthened by the use of the dictic iota at the end, then you can imagine quite self-confidently that the opponent or the speaker uses his hand to point to someone in the law court. So there are some passages where there are clear indications of dixis, and it is important for us to take this seriously into consideration, not because dixis changes the meaning of the passage, but because it changes the tone. And we know that the tone of the volume of the voice are very important for persuasion. So there are passages where we can be 100% sure that what is going on with dixis is clear, and that the speaker uses gestures or hand gestures or head gestures, by the way, to point to his opponent. But there are also some passages where we cannot be sure about anything. And this is where we get in trouble when we are trying to talk about performance. And many scholars will come to us and say, what you said is mere speculation. But it is very interesting. It is indeed very, very interesting. I'm organizing a conference now about nonverbal communication and cultural performance in Athens, exactly to examine these indications. Dixis is very important. There are many other instances where you know that the speaker uses performance to underline his arguments, like, for example, in the passages about kataptuston. You see, you feel the passage. You feel the passage. This is what I'm saying to my students, my Greek students. Feel the passage. The passage has strength. It has emotional strength. So feel the passage. When he says kataptuston, he cannot stand like a robot like that. He cannot stand like a robot, right? He raises the tone and the volume of his voice and shout and look angry at someone. So feel the passage, feel the magic spirit of the passage. So yeah, I'm always very excited whenever I'm talking about performance, as you can see, because I feel the passage myself, and I would like other people to feel the passage as well. We have excellent comments here. Let me go over the chat.
We have two more comments, one by Viviana Suñol.
Yeah, this is what I'm reading now. Why do you think we can observe that in this moment, this rhetorical phenomenon of division in actual politics, Do you see some relation with the ancient world? Well, yes, this is a very intriguing question. We can see a connection between rhetoric of the past and rhetoric of the present, certainly. You can see the face of Donald Trump and you can understand a lot about him, as you could see the face of Demosthenes Skouthropasas and understand a lot about his character. I am editing with Mike Edwards, Professor Mike Edwards and Professor Sofia Papaioannou, a volume which is about ancient rhetoric and how ancient rhetoric tends to affect modern political and cultural rhetoric. And I do believe that there is a connection between the past and the present. Let me think of something else. Emotions. We are talking about emotions. We are at the conference on emotions. Can you think of your politicians in Argentina talking about matters and not using emotions to persuade you or even deceive you? Sorry to mention that.
Yeah.
So this is one aspect of the very connection, of the very affiliation between the past and the present. Think about movements. Are your politicians standing like robots whenever they are talking to you? Is your brilliant Professor Emiliano standing like a robot in the class? I saw him in several occasions giving lectures, and he is an amazing speaker. He's an amazing speaker indeed. So in terms of both substance, by the way, and performance and gestures. So yes, you can think of many similarities and affiliations between the past and the present indeed. Even the rhetoric. I mean, I remember many years actually ago, when I was in London at UCL doing my PhD, I remember there was a finance secretary in David Cameron's cabinet. I don't know if you know about British politics, who said, "We are all in this together." He wanted to make cuts to pensions and wages and many other aspects of the public spending. And he said, "We are all in this together." And I said, I read about this line in Demosthenes. And I went to Demosthenes' passages and I found out that Demosthenes in his Olympiacs says a similar thing. We are all in this together. It is amazing. I don't know if George Osborne, the chancellor at the time, knew about ancient rhetoric, but it is amazing how Demosthenes communicated with George Osborne. It is also a bit scaring because we don't want to listen to politicians saying we are all this together and then cut public spending and wages and pensions. So yes, there are many aspects of having the past connected with the present. Let me see the other.
Luciano Sabatini, who connects tragedy with oratory. I mean, the gestures you talk about with the ones you can read or see in Oedipus or Ajax.
Oh, yes, absolutely, absolutely. This is a fascinating intertextual connection that Luciano suggests. Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Yes, we can see this intertextuality being revealed in many cases in Attic oratory. And as I say, it is one thing to find out that rhetoric takes from theater, but it is also very, very appealing to go to the theater, to tragedy, to comedy, and find out the inherently rhetorical way these genres were composed and were presented. because there is rhetoric there. So absolutely, yes, thank you, Luciano, for mentioning these affinities between passages. I always ask my students to find out intertextual affinities between passages, and that's really amazing, Luciano. Thank you very much indeed.
Facundo, who hasn't talked yet, also have a question.
Yep.
No,
Yeah,
sobre esto mismo que aportabas en la tragedia, en Alcestis de Eurípides hay un momento donde Heracles utiliza la misma palabra skitropos, que está relacionada con, creo que es skitropatsas el verbo, para decirle al sirviente por qué tiene mala cara. Pero es el mismo término y es la misma situación, donde le señala que tiene cara de perros, es etimológicamente la palabra. Y es exactamente igual al pasaje de Demóstenes que mencionaba el profesor. Está en el verso 774.
Emiliano, can you translate it?
Yeah, I don't know, Andreas, whether you understood Facundo's point, but he just mentioned that this same verb about spitting also appears with this strange face in Alcestis in line 774. And the situation, according to Facundo, is very similar. So there might be a relationship.
Oh, yeah, very, very interesting. That's very interesting in terms of my further research. Thank you very much indeed for mentioning that. Can you repeat the line number?
It's
774. 774.
Yeah, 774. 774.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. That's very good. Thanks.
And talking about hands, as you have been talking just a minute ago, I was thinking about how Cleon in Aristophanes is accused to have the hands you see in this position just to receive. And it is amazing that the same accusation is being targeted to the statues of the gods, who are also with their hands in this position just to receive, things from men.
I see. That's very interesting.
Yeah.
Well, you see, this is the amazing thing about discussing about passages of not simply oratory, but also about ancient passages in general. You receive so many information, useful information from colleagues and students, and then you have a lot of notes to take seriously into consideration. This is the amazing thing. We learn from each other. This is the community. This is the community of classicists. So thank you very much indeed, Claudia and Facundo, for everything you have mentioned. Very interesting.
Emiliano, estamos llegando al final. Creo que solamente ha quedado sin leer una última pregunta de Fernando. No sé si hay tiempo, Emi, para...
We have another comment by Fernando.
Yeah, that's what I was telling Emiliano.
Yeah, let's go with that last question.
That last
agree, Andreas, and we can close with that.
Well, yes, a very interesting question about imperative. The funny thing is that I am examining imperatives now in Attic Oratory. I'm preparing a lot of notes, actually books and books and papers about imperative. Would you consider the imperative, particularly of verbs linked to vision, as endictic? Interesting question. Let me see the passage, which is in my book. So Emiliano, you may support Fernando if he's a student of yours, because he mentions my book. That's a very good thing for you. Not in this passage. I see what you mean, Fernando, but I don't have the sense that in this passage the term geneste, which is an imperative, has any dictic qualities. In general, you're absolutely right, and this is what I'm mentioning in my paper, which is about to get published by Trends in Classics, the journal, next month. I'm saying in my passage that imperative has several uses. First of all, it is not the abrasive and aggressive way of addressing the audience, as many scholars, especially linguists, may think. I am using several passages to corroborate my view that we need to understand imperative as an assertive way of asking the judges to do this or that, but this is not an aggressive way anyway. And second, I'm saying that, yes, imperative has indictive quality and a performative quality as well, but I cannot see that very connection between imperative and vision in this passage you mentioned, Iskinesis 3 in section 143. There is in general a connection between vision and imperative, but not in this very passage. Can you explain us further, perhaps in a comment, why do you think there is a connection between imperative and vision in this passage? Because it is interesting.
Tal vez, Fernando, puedas poner en el textito alguna aclaración más, y si no, después te pasamos los datos de Andreas y en todo caso le haces la consulta de manera más...
It is interesting why you think this is a passage where imperative has any connection with vision.
Can I do it orally? It will
Yeah,
be
of course.
faster.
Yes,
I'm thinking like when you have when you prescribe an orator prescribes someone to imagine something like in this passage, you are situating the audience in some place. You are commanding there to go to a specific place, and that's why I was thinking like you have to well, it's like to evoke the quality of an argue, you know, just to vividly stay in situate yourself in that place. That's why I was making the connection with the...
You're absolutely right. There is a connection between imperative and the dictic or the vision as you describe it, and that's a very, very clever comment. Thank you for mentioning that. But not in this passage, because I think that in this passage, the term geneste has a temporal sense, not so much a dictic, a visioning one, but a temporal one. It refers to time, because it comes with a clear reference to time, makron chronon. You see that it is more a temporal imperative, not so much an enargia, as you said, imperative, an imperative of vision. But you're absolutely right that there is a connection, and a strong one, between imperative and vision. Yeah, in many cases. And I remember in my article, I referred to a passage from Hyperitis, speech 1, where we can see the very connection. So this is an absolutely clever and astute point. Thank you very much indeed, Fernando, for making this suggestion. Absolutely right. You're absolutely right on that.
Bueno. ¿Te parece, Emiliano? Me parece que estamos justo...
Creo que we are already 5 minutes after the deadline, and we promised Andreas to keep him connected only until 1, so he agreed to offer 5 minutes as a gift. So thank you, Andreas. Just like Mariel is saying on the chat, Ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ. Andreas, it was very nice to have you with us, especially because you are on summer holidays. So you interrupted your vacations to be with us on a Saturday afternoon, which is something we value and appreciate very much.
It was my pleasure. I learned a lot from you, and I discovered an exciting cultural community of Greek speaking and Greek reading, Greek readers and Greek speakers there in Argentina. It is amazing to see how much you are loving Greece, not simply studying Greek literature, but you're loving Greece, and that's really very important. Thank you very much indeed for sharing your ideas with me, and thank you for being with me this afternoon here in Cyprus. This is your morning, of course. I hope you enjoyed the lecture, and please feel free to get in touch if you have any further ideas or any questions you want to ask me. Let me give you my email. This is the personal one. you can use anyway. It was really amazing. Thank you, Claudia and Emiliano, for extending this wonderful invitation to me and for giving me the opportunity to meet so impressive colleagues and students.
Thank you very much. Gracias, Andreas, y gracias también al resto por haberse sumado por tercera vez a este ciclo de charlas.
Thank you very, very much, Andreas. We enjoyed your lecture. And for the rest, para el resto, invitarlos a la próxima convocatoria, que es el 18 de septiembre. La oradora será María Cecilia de Miranda Coelho, de la Universidad Federal de Minas Gerais, y el título de su conferencia es preciso secar deon augmein las emociones. Se refiere al pasaje de República 606D, desafíos de y a Platón. Por mi parte, eso ha sido todo. Muchísimas gracias. Dejo para que Emiliano cierre esta sesión.
No, nada. Chau, nos vemos, buen fin de semana y hasta la próxima.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Gracias, chao.